Welcome back to the Carp Chronicles podcast. In this episode, I chat with Julian Cundiff about almost 40 years worth of using and making bait. I'm sure you'll all find this one very, very interesting. Obviously, over the years, Julian's used many different baits and he shares his favourite ones and favourite ingredients and goes into detail about some very interesting things that he's used over the years. I mean, nearly 40 years. The guy has seen some different baits and he very kindly shares what he thinks is the best, what he didn't get on with, and everything else in between. So I'm sure you're going to enjoy this episode. Now, before we jump in, of course, I have two things to mention to you, actually. But first up, it's my lovely sponsor, targetbaits.co.uk. If you haven't checked these guys out and you haven't ordered from them yet, I urge you to do so. They sell extremely high-quality ingredients that, most importantly, are very, very fresh and are at great prices as well. So check them out, targetbaits.co.uk. You can actually get 10% off if you use the code CC10. So that's CC10. Pop it in at checkout. It's actually the page after checkout. You pop in your name and your address, and then when you go to the next page to choose your payment method, there's a little thing just below it that says apply discount code. Pop in CC10 in there and you'll save yourself 10% off at targetbaits.co.uk. And just before we jump in, I will quickly mention the Bait Club, which I have mentioned before on the solo episode. But for those of you who don't know what the Bait Club is, I urge you to go and check that out. Ultimately, what it is all about is me helping a small group of individuals make the very best bait possible and get the best out of their bait and fishing in general. It's very small numbers at the moment. There's only, I think, 10 or 11 people in there, but we're going to grow this out. We're going to make it even bigger and better. We have regular meetings. We do group chats once a month. I do regular recipes and posts and ingredient reveals and all kinds of stuff. And anyone can ask me whatever they want about making bait. So if you want to get the most out of your bait, I urge you to go ahead and check that out. You can do so at optibaits.com/BC. Just the letters BC. optibaits.com/BC. Alternatively, just go to the OptiBaits website, click all products, and then you'll see it near the top there. And that is called the Bait Club. That's it. I've waffled on enough. I really hope you enjoyed this episode with the main man himself, the lovely Julian Cundiff. Julian, welcome back to the podcast.
Yeah, for the third time, eh? It's great. I think the first two were the 80s and were the 90s, so true old school. And this one's on bait. So again, at my, I think I sent you a message saying, I'd love to do something a little bit more in depth rather than when did you catch your first carp? And when did you run 3 lakes? Which is great. Two audiences have not heard it before, but having listened to your podcast, it is thematic, isn't it? It's there's a large degree towards the bait side of things.
Very much so. Yeah, absolutely. And I appreciate the offer. Thank you. And you've come extremely well prepared, I must say. You've got a timeline of the different baits you were using, which kind of starts mid-80s when I was not very old at all, and runs all the way through the 90s, etc. So we'll meander our ways through that. And I think, you get people, as I said before, people just absolutely love the older bait stuff. There's a lot of fascination around how different things came about and what was being used when. So I think people are going to find this absolutely fascinating. I'm certainly looking forward to it. I will ask you a question. We've actually just done this because foolishly I started this podcast and I didn't press record. So
don't worry about it. I've done worse.
So I know the answer, but I will ask you anyway. Your first bait before carp fishing, your very first bait that you used in fishing, what was that?
1976, and it was a Devon minnow. I'd seen somebody tench fishing, but that was all very complicated, and the guy just in effect sent me in the direction of Woolworths, which was which was really a forerunner of Wilkinson. So we are going back in time, and Woolworths had their own fishing section, which was the Winfield brand. And of course, Winfield didn't sell maggots because it was all blister packs of fishing tackle, rods, reels, landing nets, etc. I decided I wanted to catch a perch, and the only ones I could really afford were Devon minnows. There were Mets spoons, which were sort of a bronzy coloured spoon with huge hooks that, looking back, I'm surprised anything ever hooked themselves on the blunts of those hooks. And there was the Devon minnow, which was like a little German torpedo, or well, like a torpedo, really. And that, caught my eye. I bought a pack of those and went spinning with them. They were great. You just cast them out like a bullet, wind them back in, and eventually the perch would hang themselves. So that was 76. So what? Yes, 47 years ago.
Yeah, I had one of those Devon minnows as well. I don't think I ever caught on it.
No.
But yeah, I had one. So they were still around in the night. They might even be around now. They probably aren't. But
I think they're more of a salmon. I think
Right.
they're a game. A big game. They're the game lure. But in those days, Winfield, everything was thrown in the pot. Pike fishing, roach fishing, salmon fishing, sea fishing. Everything was thrown in the pot. And the nearest I can think of this is if you go into any boys store, Boyes, they often have like a little fishing section, and you're as likely to find a perk there as a boilie, and you're as likely to find a 12-foot beach caster as a 10-foot carp rod. So it's pretty similar. It's cover all. We need a fishing department. Get it all chucked in.
Yeah. I remember Woolworths. I remember.
Yeah, they're great. Pick and mix.
Oh, the pick and mix. Yeah, who doesn't remember that? Yeah, awesome.
Smuggling them into the View because you can't afford the View's prices.
Exactly.
Pick and mix. Yeah, that was great.
Yeah. Good stuff. So we kick things off in what you've labelled the Richworth years, which is in 1984. I'm presuming at the beginning of your carp fishing or specimen hunting days. Run us through that.
Yeah, I mean, I was a specialist angler from sort of 79 to 83, as I discussed in the first podcast. And carp were just another species, that I saw people catching. I was no more interested in carp than I was bream, eels, pike, tench. But then I saw two guys fishing for, as they said, tench. And it didn't look very tench. It looked very specialist for tench. And they did seem to be fishing a long way out. And I just pestered them. And eventually they gave me a copy of the Carp Strikes Back and literally sent me on my way. And it was the blue one. So it was one of the early ones. And it was just a revelation. And I can't remember that there was actually boilies in there. There were recipes. And I made my own bait out of, went to the local koi carp shop or tropical fish and made it out of pellets and paste. But they used to fall off. There was no instruction really on how to do that. And then, of course, the first boilies were made available, which I saw in Course Angler, I think it was. Went into the fishing tackle shop and you got the Richworths, which were, I think in the original days, only frozen.
Yeah, you're probably right there. I know it was early 80s that they brought, I don't know exactly which year, but I know it was early 80s that they actually brought the ready-mades out, ready-rolled baits.
And they came, I think when you had your tackle shop, in effect, Richworth also provided the bait freezer. Yeah. So in effect, the bait freezer was provided with frozen bait. And, there was very little known. And we just went in and there was a number of baits, and of course you couldn't smell and test them because they were, in the packs in the freezer. I remember one of my friends got tropical mango, which didn't have much smell to it. There was salmon supreme, which was quite fishy, and there was also honey yucatan, the yellow one. And from day one, we took it in turns. One fish honey yucatan, one fish salmon supreme. I found the salmon supreme too oily. It just didn't work for me. But honey yucatan from the start was incredible, absolutely incredible. From catching 3 carp a year, we were catching 5 or 6 in a weekend, which in those days was a lot of carp. It really was. Compared to something in the 70s and early 80s, five, six, seven carp over 48 hours at a weekend, whatever the size, was a result.
Yeah, the honey yucatan was such a lovely smell as well, wasn't it? It was. I mean, I know it doesn't matter what it smells like to us, but it was
No.
this lovely kind of rich honey type smell, as the name would suggest. It was lovely
Yeah,
stuff.
it was quite subtle as well, and it was
Mm.
we used to obviously just it was the days before we really used pop-ups, and it wasn't till I realised that because they didn't sell pop-ups in those days. In fact, they probably sold some flavours. They sold the atomizers, so you could buy the Richworth neutral boilies and spray them with the atomizers, and there was some really cranberry and the atomizers were really strong. I think they said 1,000 to 1, but they were strong looking
Mm.
back. And I was never a neutral fan over spraying. And I remember just thinking, well, I want my hook bait to stand out. And Richworth, I didn't see, or there wasn't any in the shop, did any honey flavour, but Jeff Kemp did. Now, Jeff Kemp was one of my big 4 or 5, Andy Little, Kevin Maddox, Rod Hutchinson, Richie McDonald's, and Jeff Kemp were the names. Jeff Kemp was the bait man, and his honey was what a beautiful, and it was almost like honey as well. The thickness of it, and we used to soak the hook baits in the honey, and immediately you were getting quicker runs on it. The Jeff Kemp honey was stunning, an amazing attractor.
Yeah, yeah, interesting. Were you just putting that on your hook baits or over your feed baits as well?
Oh, just over the hook baits, we started grilling pop-ups. That was so difficult. Trying to, you imagine going back to ovens 35 years ago. They were either on or they were off. There was no, so you either kept turning them by hand and there was a precise cut-off, and if you went too long you burnt them and they would just smell, well, they just smelt of toast, or it was so difficult. So we would turn them in the grill, but that was so difficult. Microwaving was the one where you put them on you get a cocktail stick, stick the cocktail stick through about 3 and just put them in the microwave and keep microwaving until they were rock hard. Then and then take them off the microwave stick, because that's where the hair went, because you would never have gotten through otherwise, and just literally soak those in the Jeff Kemp honey flavour, which either turned out as just about pop-ups or more likely wafters, but they were fished on a hair, and I don't remember in those days particularly testing them. If they popped up at home, they probably sank within half an hour and were probably perfectly presented wafters by accident. But those honey yucatans made a difference. And I think moving on from there, it was you only ever put bait out when you were fishing. Only ever put bait out when you were fishing. But of course, in those years, we still had a close season, and we decided to bait up in the close season. And I think it was every alternate night, 30, 15 mil boilies, which we thought was a lot. And that made a huge difference. It was the first time I saw fish come into a pre-baited area.
It's amazing, isn't it? The difference that makes. It is just an absolute game changer. Yeah.
10-acre pit, 13. I mean, obviously, what it taught me was you had to find where the carp were. If you could we found that you couldn't make them go where they didn't want to be anyway. But if you found them and baited up, anything that was put in advance made the fishing, or appeared to, because you can't say for definite, because maybe we would have caught them anyway. So we're sort of working backwards. To me, it did make a difference because they were consistently in that area. Find where they showed, bait that area up, and just 30 the alternate nights during the week made a huge difference. That was the first time I actually saw that pre-baiting where fish were was the important thing.
Yeah, definitely. And from then on, you moved on to a more kind of higher protein bait, a fantastic bait actually, high Nouveau. Is that right?
Yeah. I mean, I started my friendship with Tim Paisley, and of course, I was still in the Richworth areas there. Why wouldn't you be? Nobody else was really making bait, or if they were, they certainly weren't telling a spotty 22-year-old hanging around the pond. And I went to Tim Paisley's, and we started doing some work on carp fisher. And of course, he was a bait man in those days. It didn't overly interest me because in those days, it was all about catching carp, and they were hard enough to catch without changing a winning combination. And chatting to Tim about bait, and in those days, Tim really was on the breadline. It was tough times for Tim at Cemetery Road. He put everything on the line to make a career out of carp fishing. And I remember opening his cupboard, and all that were in there was, I think, a jar of coffee, rye Vita, some Bovril, and then all his bait ingredients. Which was like Bengers, the Davina, lactal. He had all his bait ingredients and various flavors from various people, and that's how that started. So that was way before even Nutrabaits put out High Naval.
And when you switched over to that, did you notice a difference in terms of the fish you were catching, or not so much?
To be fair, I started off that year on just Jeff Kemp's protein mix. It was the bog standard protein mix, amaretto flavour. And this is how long ago it was. We went to Trevor Moss's tackle shop in Gainsborough, and I think we bought 3 bags of protein mix, which we thought would do us the summer. It's like, oh, could you imagine? That would probably just do a night now, and just made that. And we thought that a higher quality bait, I thought a higher quality bait would outfish the Richworths. We'd moved on to the Tylery. My mates weren't as starstruck, I'll call it starstruck, by the leading lights like Tim, and they were very, no, they don't know any more than us. So they stayed on the Richworths. I went on the protein mix. They were baiting up quite heavily with the Richworths, so they were putting out probably £3 over a weekend, whereas I was putting out £1, and they just slayed me. I was catching the odd fish, but it was clear that putting amounts, the quality of the bait in those days, providing it was half decent, didn't matter. Putting it where the carp were and in quantities to keep them there was what was important. And I spent that first summer struggling. I caught odd fish, but I didn't catch many fish. And I remember Tim kept saying to me, you need to use a good quality bait, especially with the winter, the autumn coming on. And eventually he persuaded me to try and, to knock up what was the forerunner to High Naval. So there was no High Naval. So, I had to order lactalbumine, and forgive me, I can't remember the recipe. Casein. I had to go to the health shops for the bangers and things like that. And I made the bait that way. The vitamins, which we ground them down. The flavour was SBS, because it was prior to Nutrabaits. SBS, Cornish ice cream, strawberry jam, Cotswold Baits, milk bee, and it was bergamot oil at the time, and that was what Tim gave me, and I put that combination together.
And you got some amazing attractors in there, some very well respected attractors. Yeah.
Oh, and to be honest, it was again a combination of the bait, the self-belief, the time of year. And I went straight in with that. I changed from one end of the lake to the other end of the lake. Now, the Tylery then was 27 acres of mud. It was a minimum of 2 trips walking from the car, and that was a long walk to the far end. And I was fishing obviously that bait we talked about, which was the homemade High Naval. And always on the first night, I caught, always on the first night. Second night, very, very rarely caught, and it was the freezing. I took frozen baits just in a packet, in a, I don't know, probably a Boilie bag, not a thermal one. And I complained to Tim, and we started taking them in flasks, and those flasks made all the difference.
Yeah.
From then on, I caught first night and second night. Whatever anybody says about bait and that doesn't work and all that, I can absolutely say that at that time of year, having frozen baits for that second night made all the difference. All the difference.
What did you put that down to at the time?
I was told it was the fret that the more fret that the better they were. You know, the denaturite, they were more. Whether it's the tractors, I don't know. But if Tim told me that baits from frozen were essential, I wasn't going to argue with him. You know, I was 23 with 3 years or 3 years of carp fishing experience under my belt, very little else to go on. So I've got that guidance and catching now on both nights. So I didn't need to fully understand it, the whys and wherefores, other than to know what I was doing. And it worked. And it did work. Absolutely did work. It was catching both nights rather than the opening night, rather than the first night.
Yeah, and did you notice a difference in the size of fish you were catching at
Yeah,
all?
absolutely. Straight away, in those days, the best fishing there was about 28, 29 pound. Anything over 22, 23 was a good fish. And that, I mean, I think I'd had 120, maybe two. And literally straight away, I was catching the better fish on those baits. Now, again, you know, I'm always a realist. I'm not a fantasist or an idealist. You could say, well, you'd have caught them anyway, but I'm not so sure. The better fish were responding to that protein mix, frozen, where they were. I wasn't putting large quantities out of it, but people elsewhere on the pond were catching the mid doubles to scraper 20s, and I was catching the high doubles to mid 20s, and it made a difference. And I'm one of these people, I don't need to have to know 100%, because I don't think we do know 100%, but I'm happy that if I can come up with a reason why it's working, I will keep doing it and believe it until somebody tells me something different. It's very easy to pour scorn on people's theories, but unless you can show me why that theory doesn't work, I'm happy to go with what I think works and what is working for me.
Absolutely, it's all you can go on, isn't it? Really.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah.
And it worked for me.
And the people that you're kind of fishing against, the other people on the lake, are they on boilies? Are they using particles? What are they using?
Richworth, they started off on Richworth. And again, I thought I cracked it. I thought that first year, I'm just going to go in on the frozen quality bait. We then started to get actually high naval was, and I started adding the adits, using the adits. And again, the results were for the pull of the bait and the limited amount of bait I used. It made all the difference. There was no doubt about it. My friends fishing near me would catch one fish a weekend, maybe two. I'd catch 5 or 6, you know, and that was sufficient to me because we were all doing pretty similar things. So I was pretty struck on that. Pretty struck on that. You know, it did give me that self-belief. I wasn't a chemist, but the album proved it was working.
Yeah, definitely. So what year are we up to now, Jules?
We're 87. We're at 87.
Yeah, and then in 88, you moved over to Crafty Catcher. Is that right?
I made that. When you're younger, you're impressionable, aren't you? You know, and I see it all the time now. The angling market plays to impressionable people. People are being sold confidence. And the older you get, the less that you need to be told that Terry, Julian, Laney does it, therefore I must do it. But when you are younger, you are impressionable. And I understand that. And I spent a winter fishing with Andy Little, and we absolutely slayed them on Crafty Catcher ready-mades, because they're really, in those days, there were probably 3 types. There was Duncan K, but they were very difficult to get hold of. There were Richworths and there were Crafty Catcher. Now, Crafty Catcher were sponsored Andy Little, and I had lots of trips with Andy Little, and we absolutely murdered them on Crafty Catcher Peanut Pro. And being an impressionable youngster, when somebody says you can get Crafty Catcher Peanut Pro at £5 for, £3 of bait, or do you want to still keep rolling Heineval, which in
Yeah.
those days was killing me? You fish with your hero, you caught all those fish, and it's like, well, why wouldn't I use Crafty Catcher? Because, it's the summer, I'll catch them. And so I went in on Crafty Catcher, which kind of didn't work, but not for the reasons people think.
Okay. What were they?
Well, the reasons people, again, it showed me how you can be outfished by, well, I don't want to say lesser quality bait. I was baiting up the same area I finished the previous year. So I was baiting up the Island Point with Crafty Catch about 40, 50, 60 yards, probably a couple of pounds every other night. And the guys next to me were guys who were a lot more experienced. They were spodding. I was going to say spomming, but it was spodding. They were using the biggest spod you could think with maize. Literally, I'm talking buckets of maize well before anybody else was doing it. So we're talking 10-kilo buckets. They were spodding in the middle of nowhere, as far as I was concerned, and they were putting great big 20 mil. I don't know what bait it was, but it certainly had Robin Red in it. You could tell that. And I thought, well, they're not going to outfish me. I'm fishing more accurately. They're spreading it over a big area. I'm accurate. I got absolutely murdered that summer. I think it was, they were catching 6 to 8 fish every weekend to my 1 or 2, if I was lucky. And that, again, was purely and simply, they found where the fish was showing, they put the bait there in quantity, and the fish took advantage of an available food source.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely. Are people using different particles as well? I think you just said
it was just simply maize. It
Right.
was buckets of maize. They were fishing probably, I would say, 70 to 80 yards in what we would term the middle of nowhere. There was some onion grass there, but they were doing that every night, if not every other night, 10 kilos. Now, if you're putting 30, 40, 50 kilos of maize at 70 yards compared to my £6 of Crafty Catcher ready-mades at 20 yards, 30 yards at the most, those fish just took advantage of the available food source. Like when Bernie Loftus turned Harefield over on the Richworth ready-mades. He created an available food source which the fish took advantage of. It's not as easy nowadays because everybody's doing it. But when only 2 people are baiting up maybe a tennis court-sized area with bait, and the rest of us are just baiting up to marker floats at 30 yards with a spread of boilies, there was only going to be one winner looking back.
Definitely. Yeah, definitely. It makes perfect sense to me.
So again, I retreated with my tail between my legs, and again that winter went back onto the Heineval, and it worked again. I had quite a few fish on tiger nuts in the late autumn with condensed milk, which was something Tim put me on, and that was a very good attractor. Condensed milk, tiger nuts soaked in it till they were almost turning. That was a good way of holding numbers of carp, I found. But so it's high level and tigers, and that sort of got, again, it was the better fish came to the Heineval, more fish came over the tigers. But it was another lesson learned that you took away in your back pocket. You don't say, and I've always done this, I've never thought anybody was lucky. I've never put my arse kicking, me getting my arse kicked, as down to anything other than my failings rather than their luck. And I just thought, I know why they've caught those fish. I can see it.
So did that make you change bait or change your baiting strategy? What did you change?
It made me understand that simply higher quality bait competing against, in not much number, competing against quantities of bait where fish haven't been mullered on quantities of bait, was not going to work. It's easy to say now, well, yeah, if everybody's filing in krill, cell, scopex, squid, or whatever, and it's been done to death for 10 years, then somebody who goes in with a higher quality bait may well turn it over, but we're going back 33 years, and those fish just took advantage of something new. And it's, it's what I say to people about the percentage game. In the olden days, if you were first on tigers, first on high attract hook baits, first on long casting, first on a boat, first on anything, you slayed them. Nowadays, you can't be first on anything, can you? It's been done to death.
It's extremely difficult. Yeah, it really is.
Yeah. So you can't get that big leap over everybody else. So it's like the guy who catches the most generally is doing more time, more baiting up, more accurate, sharp. There's no one thing that is separating the successful now from decent anglers who are not as successful. I don't believe so. It's down to a number of things. In my belief, anyway.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So how long were you on the Crafty Catcher ready-mades for?
Oh, that till about July.
Okay.
I mean, I'm daft, but I'm not that daft.
Yeah.
I only need kicking 4 or 5 weekends in a row before I realised that I couldn't compete with that sort of thing. Yeah. So I started fishing. Again, I moved away from where they were fishing. I started watching for fish. I started using the Heineval again, frozen in the flask. I couldn't compete with quantities of bait, but I just put it where I saw fish and overnighters. And again, I caught less fish, but definitely bigger fish on the high quality bait. I think large numbers of fish were drawn to the maize, the huge boilies, etc., etc. But I had to do what I had to do. I had to compete on my own terms.
Definitely. Yeah, definitely. So at this point, there's still no one rolling those baits up.
No, not at all. And it was, I rode my Heineval and things like that. But it was getting there, and I think for me the big thing was, and again, these things happen, and it's only when you look back. I'm sure many of the listeners to this will remember the Carp Fisher magazine. Remember the Carp Society's Carp Fisher?
Yeah.
Now, Tim Paisley used to do what was the big interview, and he did it with a variety of people. And one of the people was a guy called Ian Booker. Is that a name that rings a bell?
It does, yeah.
Booker the hooker. And we had this interview in there with Tim interviewed him, and I read the interview, and it said, he was mass baiting with Robin Red, Tesco carrier bags full of 20 mil, Robin Red baits. And I remember during the interview, Tim had put, he questioned him. He says, "Yeah, that first weekend, I had 620s," and I thought, well, that's unlike Tim to allow that to creep in. What he meant is that first season I had 620s. No, it was that first 24 hours or weekend, I forget, he had 620s.
Wow. Purely
and simply on pre-baiting of a food source the fish wanted. And when I'd spoke to Tim, and Tim said, no, it was quantity of bait, of a bait the fish wanted, and it was what he called the available food source. And by then I decided to change waters, and one of my local waters, which is a water called Drax. Now, back in those days, that was a syndicate, a circuit water around us. It held carp to upper 20s, not quite 30s. I walked around the lake, watched the local lads. There were fish rolling everywhere, and I mean everywhere. And I, talked to lads and said, it's a tough water, this, mate. We're all on high protein baits. We use about half a kilo a weekend. We're using size 10 hooks. We're using multi-strand. And I'm thinking, oh, this rings a bell. I was that guy fishing small hooks, Heineval, little holes in the weed, whilst getting my ass kicked by the guys fishing quantities of bait. So I took a leap of faith, again, from a lesson learned. So I spent that close season rolling up sacks upon sacks of Nutrabaits Enervite.
Brilliant bait, really well respected. Lots of people would love to see that brought back, definitely.
Yeah, I know it is back now. That you can get it now. Nutrabaits have brought it back.
Is it? Have you had a play with it? Is it the same as it
No,
was?
I haven't, and obviously, I I can't imagine what. And this is the thing about the bait world. Baits change as much because of the ingredients are not available anymore, are they? You can't
Exactly.
get certain ingredients. I can't say that it's the same, but it is available. And I have to say, obviously, Bill said, Bill put the combination together. It was Enervite. It was 5 times size 2 eggs. It was 6 to 8 drops of bergamot oil. It was I think 2 or 3 mils of sweet kajausa, which was a superb ingredient. And then it was Nutramino, which again was a superb ingredient. And we rolled probably 5 or 6 sacks. And I would go down and put 3 triple mixes in. So a mix was 6 eggs, a triple mix was 18 eggs. So one mix was 5 eggs, a triple mix was 15 eggs. So I was putting 45 eggs worth of bait out in 1989, baiting up.
That was very, very heavy for the time, right?
But absolutely, in those days, you only had Dren and feederpole. We didn't have we didn't have the quality catapults then. There was no spodding or spomming. But we were only fishing at 40 or 50 yards. So I literally would find a weed bed, cast about, find a clear spot round it, and just simply muller it I think it was 18 mils. So it wasn't too bad. You weren't baiting up with 15 mils. It was 18 to 20 mils. And I have never seen a reception to bait then or since. Within 3 or 4 days, you would put a marker float out, you would bait up, and there were fish rolling over the marker float. It was just simply, and that had never been done. And literally, you filled it in, and it was. I've never seen anything like it. It was. I think I had 90 fish that summer. On a water that if you got 12 a year, it was good.
Yeah, definitely.
It just made it easy. I've never had fishing like that on a bait that made it so easy on that water.
And just to veer off a little bit, I know this isn't on our timeline that we're working through, but Haifs, obviously, Robin Red is being used in the fishing industry. I'm sure some other bits from Haifs are being used. Because they were obviously a bird feed company, still are. How did they kind of get on the scene?
Well, I think they were there because obviously Hutchie, wasn't it? Haifs, that's where I would imagine Rod got most of his birdseed ingredients because obviously Lincolnshire, just down the road, Haifs are. Grimsby area. Word gets out. Nutrabaits obviously got their ingredients from Haifs, and that's where I can't tell because I never saw where they got them. I would go to the factory and just pick up my bags of bait, the sacks of Enervite. But I presume that's where. Nutrabaits would put the ingredients on the outside, but you didn't know what amount of ingredients was being, what level or what percentages. But I believe that's where the majority of birdseed. Bill will know better than anybody, but I believe that's where the birdseed ingredients came from Haifs. And of course, then Haifs realised later on, well, we might as well make our own baits. Haifs started making their own baits then.
Yeah, what I meant was, I'm probably wrong, but I think in those kind of, well, where are we? We're very late 80s, aren't we? Early 90s. Weren't people ordering like kind of direct from Haifs themselves? Anglers were.
Yeah, absolutely. Some people were making their own baits direct from Haifs. I always found I was happy to take bits out of the equation. So I was happy if Bill Cottam and Tim Paisley came up with Enervite, and I chucked it out and it caught me 5 times more carp than anybody else in a very short period of time. I was happy to take that as I don't need to make bait myself. It's making it yourself is hard enough. It's rolling it when somebody else has given you all. Well, we purchased it was hard enough to put it together. Was a step I didn't think I needed to do, but a lot of people did that. I think a lot of people ordered direct from Haith's. I mean, there was, if you pick up carp fisher in the 80s, you can buy these ingredients from a million, well, no, from dozens of different people who sold ingredients. You know,
Yeah.
SBS, pick up the catalogues. You can buy. They were obviously buying Robin Red from Haith's and then selling it to you.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I just didn't know if they were really in the public eye. I guess people found out that, you know, the likes of Nutrabaits were using them and probably went direct. But yeah,
I think some did, but to be honest, at the time, it was in those years there was always. Nowadays, I think it's quite difficult to make a bad bait, whereas back in those days, how many people made baits that just didn't work or whatever? Yeah. Nowadays, it's a part of the equation that I don't really worry about. I don't think I've worried about bait for 25 years. You get your bait and, well, that's that bit of the equation sorted. I just need to find them, be there when they're feeding, etc., etc. Whereas in those days, whether the bait worked or not was a bit like, will the rig work, or are there any carp in here? Or, it was part of the equation that you were likely to get wrong. There's plenty of baits I've seen put together that people have had nothing on, or had a result the first week and then failed.
Yeah. So we're in late 80s. You're using Enervite. Are you doing anything else to it? Are you adding liquids, anything like that?
Well, I think that worked very well. And I think again, a game changer for me was the Crafty and Ambio. Yeah, again, if you go online, people used to say Ambio was simply a body, Nutramino. I can't say it was or it wasn't, but Dave Chilton wrote some very interesting stuff on a couple of fishing sites specifying why it wasn't the same as Multimino, etc., in great graphic detail, and explaining you just can't get this anymore. And if he could, he would be selling it, but he couldn't because the distributors simply didn't make it anymore. But that Ambio was a massive, again, another game changer for me for hook baits, especially in the colder months.
So you're just literally drizzling some on your hook baits?
I used to soak all my hook baits in it, and that made a huge difference. There was something in that Ambio that carp really, really liked. It was incredible. It was one of those. I wish there's not many things I wish we still got, but I suppose Ambio, the key. The original chocolate malt. There are certain things you think, oh, I wish I'd stockpiled that if it had still carried on. But yeah, that Crafty Ambio was a game changer for me. It was a bit, it certainly caught me a lot of fish and a lot of big fish.
And I mean, back then, I wasn't using it back then. I wasn't fishing for carp back then, but how similar to Minamino was it? Was it a kind of raspberry?
It wasn't out then. What you got, Ambio came out first, right. And everybody else then said, well, it's like anything else, isn't it? Nutrabaits brought out, SBS brought out SBS, Cornish ice cream, strawberry jam, EA. Then that gets written about, everybody catches on it, so everybody brings out their own version, don't they?
Yeah,
which might or might not be the same, and probably isn't at times. So Ambio came out first. Now, Dave Chilton is the only one who knows, but everybody else started bringing out versions that appeared to be the same. I can't say they were the same because I didn't own the rights to Ambio or no, but Dave Chilton specified in infinite detail why these raspberry flavored ones that appear to be similar were not the same.
Interesting.
And the fact is that he couldn't sell it. He couldn't sell it anymore, which backed up his story, because if it was simply the ones that everybody else sold, he'd have just simply kept bottling it in those Ambio bottles and saying, fill your boots, lads. But it literally disappeared because he couldn't get it anymore. So it's one of those where I tend to believe that, you know, unless you had the rights to Ambio and could duplicate it, I think there's a lot of people made things which were pretty similar to Ambio. But I don't know. I'll be guessing.
Yeah. Okay, so then we're into early 90s. As I understand it, you've moved on to bigger baits, 26 millers. You've upgraded from your 18s.
Yeah. Again, impressionable, you know, and that's why I never, ever, I avoid making comments about people who are perhaps less experienced than us as anglers being, jumping on the cell bandwagon, the tigers bandwagon, the spodding bandwagon, because back in those days, we were impressionable. 1991, I was probably 7 years into my carp fishing, which 7 years nowadays is a long way into your carp fishing because the availability of knowledge, as you well know. 7 years in those years wasn't a lot because there wasn't YouTube. There wasn't the information available that there is now. So you were very impressionable. And when I'd seen people like Brian Scoyles annihilating hard waters on the Boilie crumb and the big Boilie, I thought, well, that's another way I can, irrespective of whether I was doing well on something else, if you see a new tactic, you think you'll jump on it as well. But again, that's the impressionable side of things, isn't it? He was fishing the Boilie crumb, and I mean sacks of Boilie crumb with just 26 mil hook baits. But that works well if there's no roach, bream, tench there. When there are roach, bream, tench there, you get murdered, absolutely murdered.
Definitely, yeah. So you're using the 26 mil freebies alongside the crumb? Is that
yeah,
right?
Just a single bait over the crumb. Single bait.
I see. So you're not.
Yeah, sorry, just You were literally heaving in the crumb, so you've got, it's like a spod cloud, isn't it? Again, that was a Brian. There's a number of people who are doing so well on waters, and you think, well, I'll be the first in on that, and then you fill these waters in, and you have bream after bream after, especially when you're using betaine, green lip mussel extract, and it's just crumb. You can imagine what that's like.
Yeah, not fun.
No, 126 mil hook bait, loads of smell, those bream just punish you. So in the end, I ended up just simply fishing 24 to 26 mil baits, So I took the crumb out the equation and just fished the large baits. And that, to a large extent, deterred the bream. If you fish one hook bait, eventually they will get you. But if you fish lots of 26 millers, I found that the carp would bully the bream out the way.
Yeah.
And that was it. That was a very, very, again, a very effective way of catching less fish, but the bigger fish. It certainly sorted out for me on a number of waters I fished. Just fishing huge hook baits caught me bigger fish, but less fish. And that's when you're doing overnighters and you're not maybe just simply what I call a bounty hunter. And I don't mean that disrespectfully. I like catching carp. I wasn't a bounty hunter. In fact, I'm not now. And sometimes catching 3 carp a night was much more fun than catching one big one every 2 weeks for me.
Yeah, no, yeah, and each to their own, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Definitely no right or wrong. Yeah, okay. So, and the crumb that you're using, what bait are you on now?
That was big fish mix. It was simply, we would roll it into, we'd make the mix, but then so hand rolling it, make sausages, and then just boil them, and then just literally stick it through food processors and blenders. How many of my mother's food processors and blenders it wasn't too bad with big fish mix because that was quite a soft bait, but you would just make literally hundreds of sausages, chop them into like licorice sticks that would just about fit in your mum's food processor, and burn the motor out over a week or two. You know, but thank you. I
Brilliant.
mean, I've lost my mum years ago, but my God, I think the things I did to my mother and father's kitchen equipment, electricity bills, boilers, that I just would not allow anybody to do to my house.
Yeah.
I think, God, we were so spoiled. So
Good
that's
old
what you did.
man.
You just stick these sausages in. You then just make these bags of crumb. So you make them all up. You stick them in the freezer. You would then probably fishing weekends. You take them out on the Thursday night and the Friday morning, and then you just give them an hour or two to start defrosting. You would then just stick them through the food processor, and we were taking bags of crumb down. 3, 4, 5 kilo bags of crumb down, and still spodding it, wasn't spot? Yes, spodding it out and fishing over that. And my God, it did create. It was a very effective method if there weren't nuisance fish there.
Very nutritional bait as well, wasn't it? The big fish mix.
Fantastic bait, absolutely
Yeah.
fantastic bait. Yeah, fantastic bait.
Yeah. And then you kind of moved on to the Enervite Gold mid 90s.
Yeah. The Enervite Gold was again. It was a lot of people were on the fish meals, and again, you're impressionable. Fish meals in the summer, bird seeds in the winter. But I thought, I spend all summer because I tried to fish one water a year. I might, in the depths of winter, go to Willow Park or somewhere like that. But generally, I try and campaign fish one fish all winter. And I just think, well, I bait up all spring, summer, autumn, and then flip flop onto another bait. I could do with a bait that I can use all year round, and obviously, Enervite Gold was the one that you could use all year round. It was good in the summer, and it was particularly good in the winter. And that's the bait I went on. And again, fortuitously, I went to Three Lakes one day, and it was probably about 93, 94, because I'd written. When you write books in those days, everything was handwritten. Now, handwriting 120,000 words is hard work.
Yeah.
Especially when you've got a job, you've got magazines to edit, etc., etc. And I literally used to say to myself, from March till June, July, I am not going to go fishing. I am simply going to write every single night. Home from work, 3 hours of writing, and that's a discipline.
That is a discipline, and it
Yeah.
takes dedication. But I mean, your writing skill must have improved exponentially from doing that.
Yeah, it was. Yeah. It did. And I remember finishing the book off, Practical Carp Fishing, and I went down. I thought, you know what, I'm going to have a midsummer to winter on Three Lakes. And as I turned up, there was a guy, and he'd had one of the bigger fish. And nice guy, I think he's called Andy Mansell. Andy, anyway. And he got the fish out, and he was in his bivvy, and this smell came out of his bivvy, and it was like the best chocolate smell ever. It just smelled like a chocolate factory. And I said, God, what is that smell? Oh, he went, it's chocolate malt. And I said, really? And it was just Boilies. It wasn't, it wasn't a flavor bottle. And the Boilies, when you smell something, you just think, wow, and I said, what's that? And he says, yeah, chocolate malt. Now, I can't remember. I think it was Nash's with the green Nash's, but I says, well, that's a good flavor. He says, yeah, do really well on it. And I thought, I don't know why. I just, instead of using the SBS EA flavors, I thought, you know what? That's a really good musky smell. And I went in with, I think, 7 mils of chocolate malt in a five egg mix. Spoke to Gary Bays. Gary Bays said you need to mix it with chocolate powder palatant, which smooths it off. I went in with a Cotswold Bates Milk B. So it was literally 5 size 2 eggs, Enervite Gold, 7 mil of chocolate malt, chocolate powder palatant, which was like a Horlicks, but tasting of chocolate. What a bait that was. What a smell. And I've never known a better winter bait. for just holding, fish. You could literally use it in winter like you could in summer. I was putting £1 a night out, £2 a night out in the depths of winter
Mm.
and
And it,
dragging the fish around. Dragging the fish. It was going in one end, coming out the other end. You literally, as the fish were moving, you were baiting up and you were catching them within minutes on the coldest of overnighters. Again, for a winter bait, I've never seen a winter bait that I've managed to put so much in for so long on so many different waters and catch so many carp.
and this wasn't Hutchie's chocolate malt.
This was Nash's, and I only know that because obviously, when you're a writer, you have to take pictures of everything, and I've got a picture of, and it's my dad because obviously, you need somebody to take the pictures of you with the thing. So I said, Dad, just put my Daiwa jacket on, and I've got the picture. I'll take a picture of you with it, and it was Nash's because it was the green label, chocolate malt. I think it was the Nutrabaits yellow colouring, etc., etc. Yeah, it was the but I think then weren't Nashy and Hutchie very close, and I would think that I think Kev probably had the same access to flavors that Rod had.
Yeah, I think you're right there. Yeah.
Judging and by what a flavor. Yeah, what an attractor that was.
And just to touch upon the Enervite Gold, obviously that was based on the standard Enervite, which had Robin Red in. Was it sold as exactly the same minus the Robin Red?
It was a yellow bait. It was just.
Yeah,
I think Lockie did it a Save seed mix. He did a yellow seed mix and a red seed mix. In effect, I think Enervite Gold was the yellow seed mix. So it was Niger seed. It was in effect, it was a very sweet tasting. There was nothing red about the bait at all. It was all in effect yellow, white to yellow. But again, in one end and out the other. What an incredible bait that was. And probably still is. Who knows?
Yeah, sure. Yeah. And then you moved on to the Boilies.
Yeah, Nutrabaits Biolix. Oh yeah. Now again, it's I should know better. So 1998, I'm 35 then. But like everyone, still impressionable, and I've done so well on this, I've done so well on that. And then, what happens during the close seasons? You talk to people, don't you? And like, oh, yeah, that's, Big Fish Mix is good and Enervite Gold's good. But, it is possible to put together a better bait. And I think it was Dave Moore, who, we were talking about earlier. I think Dave Moore potentially put this bait together. I may be doing a disservice to Bill, but I have a feeling that this was something to do with Dave Moore. And it was a meat and bone based. It was a completely different kind of bait. It wasn't a protein mix, casein, lactalbum, and things like that. Nor was it a fish. It was it was meat and bone meal. It was an alternative protein.
And so obviously this is very different from what the carp are used to seeing. How did you get on with that bait? Did it
incredible? Again, another. I mean, it was. If you just give me 1 second, I'll grab it now.
Yeah, sure.
Nutrabait. Not very professional, but
no, that's good.
Here, I have the recipe from 1998.
Oh wow!
Yeah, here it is, and it's covered in the. So this was the mix. It was the Biolux plus betaine, seaweed, and kelp. It was for 5 for the Biolux. It was 4 gram of betaine, 20 gram of kelp, and 20 gram of seaweed. And for 5 large eggs, it was 7.5 mils of kelp extract as well, 5 mils caviar flavour, 1/2 mil black pepper oil, 25 mil corn steep liquor, 5 mil molasses, and 1 mil of sweet kajauza. Very, very different to what everybody else was using. A very dark, rich, moist bait that again was phenomenal. Just, it was one of those where you couldn't put more bait out than anybody else. One fish meal was very much like another fish meal. You were running out of advantages on the bait front unless you went totally different. You couldn't. There were bait wars on there. People were using Nash sting mix, people were using the Grange, people using big fish mix, and the only way that really you could find an advantage was going being different, for want of a better word, and that was again another phenomenal bait. It reminded me very much of Nash's key bait, very much of that, an alternative bait.
When you say it reminded you of the key bait, just because the key was very different from everything else around, or
very dark, spirulina in it, seaweed, just when you pick up baits nowadays, it's either a fish meal, isn't it? A bird seed, and there's not a lot in different. It's you walk into
right.
It's one of the other, isn't it? And it was in those days. It was a fish meal, or it was a yellow or a red bird seed, or maybe a protein mix. There was nothing much different in quantity, was there?
I agree. Very much the same now. As you say, you see most people really, they're either on a nut bait or a fish meal, aren't they? Really, maybe a bird food.
Yeah. I mean, the literally, and again, three of us went in on it because I think if just one person had gone in on it, it wasn't going to make. It could have made a difference, but when you get three of you putting in 40 kilos, 60 kilos a week, again, it just dominated the water. I'm not saying other people didn't catch, they did, but without a shadow of a doubt, fish were coming to that bait.
Yeah, I do not doubt it.
Providing you put it where they were naturally. And this is the one thing about bait. Maybe people will disagree with me, but I find the most important thing is to find where they are naturally going to be and where they will pick bait up. I don't think you can just simply say, I'm going to pick this swim, I'm going to fill it in, and I'll put that much in, they'll come to me. I don't find that's a good premise to a baiting campaign at all.
No, I think it's very, very hard, particularly on the bigger waters. I mean, a carp could just never come across it. You could be piling your bait up on the bottom and nothing is eating it. So yeah, well, I agree with you.
Absolutely. But again, I took that on 3 or 4 different waters. Then, of course, what happened? We had the mad cow disease, and you were not allowed to import meat and bone meal.
Yeah.
And that ended that bait.
Yeah. Yeah. Very sad.
It never sold well because it had what looked like bollocks written on it when it was actually mild. You just couldn't sell it because of what it looked like. And then, of course, as soon as the you stopped being able to import meat and bone meal, it killed the vital ingredient of that base mix. And if you look around in that time, if you look late 90s, mid to late 90s, there were a lot of alternative base mixes being developed that 3 or 4 years later were not being developed anymore because a lot of the ingredients were not available anymore because of the banning on certain things, mad cow disease.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I agree. I'm sure someone told me, I don't know if it was Bill or
yes,
I think it was Bill. I'm sure they called it the Biolux or Boilux on purpose to make it sound like the bollocks. I'm sure that was a thing, but perhaps
no problem. But unfortunately, it's a sort of it's not like FC UK. I mean, I think when you had there was that rage on FC UK. Now that could have either taken off or been a complete dead duck, but it took off. The Biolux was again one of those great baits. I would never have any qualms if it was available using again, if that was part of my bait armory, but it won't be, and I don't think it can be. It's the way it is, isn't it?
Yeah. And then Trigger is on the scene at this point, is it? Or soon after?
Yeah. Nutrabaits then, of course, without a shadow of a doubt, and Bill will tell you this, certainly in the 90s, probably till the early noughties, Nutrabaits were one of the biggest bait firms.
Yeah, the best, I think.
There was Richworth had their their audience. Mainline were big and getting bigger, but it was Mainline and Nutrabaits and Premier that were the big boys. And Nutrabaits had to keep making baits, had to keep coming up with new ideas. And one of the ones, and I mean, Bill did an amazing, I don't know if that still is available, that the Trigger interview. And that's true, that Trigger. The only thing, again, it didn't work for me. Trigger, I did find, was very big fish specific. So when I'm doing my overnighters, I'm doing 2 or 3 overnighters and going to work. Now, not quick overnighters. My overnighters were getting there at 6 o'clock at night and packing up at 6 in the morning. I love catching carp, I'll confess. I'd rather catch 4 17-pounders than 125. It's a carp to me. And I found with Trigger, all of a sudden, I was getting bites every other night. It was a better fish, but it certainly was big fish specific. And Brian Scholes will tell you that as well. He caught less fish, but bigger fish on it. There was something in that, again, results that Trigger caught less fish, but the bigger ones.
Yeah, I think that's the way it goes for certain baits. I really do, particularly the kind of more nutritional baits, let's say, higher protein levels, etc. I think there's definitely a pattern there.
And that was without a shadow of a doubt. And it's only when you look back, I look at my, this makes me sound really old, I have slides, of course, and I look at the thickness of my slide albums, and I can tell how good a year was by looking at how many sheets of slides I've got in. And I look at sort of 2000, which is when I was using Trigger, and there's probably only about 10 or 15 sheets with slides in them. And then I look at the years that I used Trigger Ice, and the album, the folder they're in is bulging. And now to some people, they don't want that. They would prefer to be big fish specific, and Trigger was that way. But then Trigger Ice it didn't seem to catch any less bigger fish, but it also caught many more fish.
And at what point did you make the switch away from Nutrabaits onto Nash?
2010, 2012. I mean, I've been with, again, I'm always honest about these things. And I was with Nutrabaits from before they were Nutrabaits. I was using the Addicts and things like that, paying for them for many, many years. Probably until about 93, I was paying for my bait. And I would say that Nutrabaits did very well out of my writing, but I accepted that was part of it. And then I remember talking to Brian Garner, who was one of the partners, and he said something to me once, and he said, "You've never sold a kilo of bait in your life, son." And I thought, no, I've never walked to a tackle shop and sold a kilo of bait.
Yeah.
But it doesn't work like that. And I had, I think, a year on Nash when Nash first started. I didn't want to change bait companies, but you don't need to have your face slapped. Brian Garner then left and Skiddy joined, and I went back to Nutrabaits, and I was with Nutrabaits till 2011, 2012. Now, I was a Nash consultant or Nash sponsored angler for all those years, and Kev, what a lovely bloke. He always said to me, you really should be on Nash, but I respect your loyalty more than I respect you not coming to us. He says, I understand, and I respect people who are loyal. So you're an idiot for staying with them. You should be, Kev obviously believed that Nash bait was the best thing ever, but I do respect your loyalty. And it got to the stage where I think Bill will tell you, Nutrabaits started to struggle. I got my bait for free from the late 90s onwards. It was rolled by Rolling Baits and them. And I'll never forget, I got an email from Bill one year, and it said something like, you'll have to pay to have your baits rolled. I kept the email. And I said to Bill, I says, I'm sorry, Bill, and people can think of this whatever they want. I will never pay to have my baits rolled, with the amount of work I do for the company and have done.
Yeah.
And I said to Kev, Kev, I'll move on to Nash bait. Now, that's the way it was. I can't be more frank and honest than that. I'm a very loyal guy. People have offered me twice the money to go from Nash to other companies. It's not about the money. To me, it's about confidence in what I'm doing and loyalty to people who've supported me. So I felt that I could step away without feeling I'd let a friend down.
Yeah, but obviously kept on good terms with Bill as well, right?
I was kept on good terms with Bill, and I said to Bill, look, if you go through the magazines now and I do a throwback Thursday, you'll never see me forgetting which baits I caught stuff on. Now, how many anglers nowadays forget the bait they had fish on 6 months ago, never mind 10 years ago?
Yeah.
You look at my throwback Thursdays, I'll talk all about Ambio, I'll talk about Enervite Gold, I'll talk about Jeff Kemp's protein mix. And I said to Bill, I'll never forget what I did for you and you did for me. And when I come to write stuff, I won't say I caught on a fish meal. It'll be big fish mix if I used it. So I don't want to, it's fishing. It's not a cure for cancer. It's not life or death. Absolutely. If people want to fall out with me, it won't because of what I've done to them. So, I stayed friends with Bill. I'm sure it was difficult because, I've gone from one bait firm to another, but not once will you find writing that says, and I think Nash bait is better than Nutrabaits. This is a better bait than I've ever used before. If I ever see that,
it's terrible stuff, isn't it? Yeah.
It's embarrassing.
It happens as well. It does happen.
Oh, God, I might say that I think the key is the best bait I've ever used. But really? I will also say, remember, I'm using Scopex squid. So somebody might say you're slapping Bill in the face. I'm also slapping Nash in the face.
Yeah.
Because I'm saying I try and be honest about stuff, and people will. I always say to somebody before they follow somebody or take somebody's word as gospel, go and look what he was saying a year before, 3 years ago, 6 years ago, before you start. This is the best thing since sliced bread.
Most definitely.
So that's so. Obviously, I went to Nash in 2012.
And what bait were you starting on then?
Straight out, the first bait I went on was a monster squid, which was a lot of Nash baits that time were either based around Monster Pursuit or Scopex squid. So I would imagine that Monster Squid was a combination of the two.
Yeah, I used Monster Squid. I can't remember what it was like, to be honest. Too long ago for me, but it was I'm sure it was a variation of a Scopex squid.
I'm sure it was. It was Monster Pursuit. I'm sure it was part of Monster Pursuit crossed with part of Scopex squid. And again, I did very well on that. But again, it was a time, and it's not so much now, but it was a time where people wanted to change bait every year. And I'm baffled by that. Every year, people want a new bait. And so all of a sudden, and Nash's bait range he probably had 5 different types of Scopex or squid. So there was Tangy squid, Scopex squid, squid EE, Scopex squid red. Yeah. And there was too many in the range. And now, when you're a big bait firm, when you are stopping the rollers to make 100 kilos of a less selling, it doesn't make sense. Business sense, it doesn't make sense.
No.
And eventually, Nash had so many baits that every time you had to stop the rollers for the big sellers, it was costing him. You were diluting the range. And I would think that Mainline had the same too. If you look at the Mainline range, they had at one time, they must have had 10 or 15 different kinds of baits, stroke base mixes out. And now they focus the baits onto. Well, there are certainly less now, certainly. I mean, I'm not a Mainline user, but you don't have the ranges that you had in 94, 95, 96, 97, do you?
No, definitely. It's common sense and it's just business. I mean, good, successful restaurants will do the same. They,
Absolutely.
you go to these restaurants or pubs and there's like 20 different mains, and it's like, Christ, how
Yeah.
how do they keep on top of all that? And it's just yeah, it's things are going to slip, aren't they? I think do a few things and do them very well, and that's you're
Yeah.
onto a winner.
Yeah, you have to do it, and it is the fishing business. And much as though I wish chocolate malt was available and the key was available, and Delkims are available and AKN alarms were available, and all that.
Yeah.
It's there are two sides to the bait. One, well, there are three sides. One, it has to catch carp, and it has to catch carp for the masses. Number two, it has got to be profitable to continue with the business. And it has got to make business sense.
Yeah.
You cannot just keep making baits that satisfy a small percent. Otherwise, your bait firm, you will go under. You have to compete and make lots of bait that catches carp for the masses. That's the reality of the fishing business. And thirdly, the ingredients have to still be available, because baits 10 times over what I do. Ingredients become unavailable, I'm sure.
Most definitely. Yeah. It's everything I bring out, I have to think, realistically, am I going to be able to keep getting that? And I'm a very small business, and obviously even more so for the bigger guys. Yeah, it's a real
become
thing.
unavailable all of a sudden. We haven't got that anymore.
Or
now,
it changes. Yeah, things
change.
change.
It changes, So whether we've not got it or it changes, it's one and the same for me. And it becomes very difficult. And I think some bait ranges are discontinued because they cannot get the ingredient or the whatever it was that was the magic side to that.
Yeah.
And there are others where baits just simply do not catch on with the public.
Mm-hmm.
And if you want your bait firm to continue, then you have to be able to keep selling baits that the public buy. Whether you think they're brilliant or crap, if the public are buying them in numbers, that's what keeps the factory open, the people employed, the tackle shops. If your bait is sat there for month in, month out and isn't selling, no tackle shop is going to allow that bait to sit there.
Absolutely.
And that's the reality of the fishing business.
Yeah. So you're on some variant of the squid. The key then comes out. Obviously, you rated that very highly. When did that was sort of early 2000.
I would say 2000. No, it probably came it was out 2000, probably 13, 14, maybe, because Crowley was using it. It was not called the key then. I think it was called the key 7 or key 6, because there were a certain number of ingredients that were in it that were found. I think it was designed by Keith Sykes.
Yeah, it was. I believe it was. I don't remember it being called the Key 7 or anything like that, though.
No, when it was a test bait.
I see. It
was sent to me and a number of us, and I was doing so well on monster squid or whatever, and this bait came, and it was like, I don't want to be changing baits again. And it was sort of a greeny, blacky. It didn't look over appealing, but then Simon Crowe is very cute when it comes to getting on bait early, and he got on that key, and that year he used the key. I think he had big fish from so many different waters, and I just thought, there's something in this, because I know how Simon fishes, I know what his rigs are, where he fishes, and he just said to me, there's something about this bait, Jules. There is an incredible bait. And I thought, do you know what? I'm not impressionable anymore. I was probably getting on for 50 then. I thought, but there was something about it. And I took that key and I took it to a water started to take it to waters that had never seen it. Now, the advice was for the key was to use less, use it sporadically, and it works well. And I thought, I think there's more to it. This, and instead of using it, sparingly, I took it in 12 mil, and I would fish a kilo a night. And then a kilo wasn't enough, and it was 2 kilos, 3 kilos. Now that was all right, because obviously I get it without paying for it financially, but obviously the work you do is far more work
Yeah.
on a pad. You know, if you worked out the rate of hours you put in writing, shows, conferences, talks, podcasts, social media, your bait is not free by a long way. And I was absolutely slaying waters on it. Park lakes, syndicates, clubs. It made, again, it was all I would say, it was like Enervite. It made carp fishing easy. If
Mm.
you could find the carp and put it where they were, they would not leave till it was all gone. Literally, it's probably one of the only baits that I've ever thought, when I'm not getting bites, it has all gone. The carp's mouths were black because it was a very dark green, blacky sort of back. It was a game. It was a game. It was one of those things. It was like I didn't want to go fishing without it. It was almost like somebody sending me fishing without the herring or without a buzzer or without a sharp hook. It was like when the key was discontinued, I felt like my arm was being taken off me.
Did we? I mean, you might not want to say, which is absolutely fine, of course. But
No,
did you ever kind of find out? Did Gary ever mention what was the active component of that, or Keith ever mention it or anything?
No, I mean, there was spirulina in there. There was a
Yeah.
number of ingredients in there. And again, I was one of those guys was, if you tell me it works, it works. And my album's full of pictures. I don't need to know precisely what's in it. But the reality was that people were not buying it. And I find it quite difficult because I was going to lakes and I'm a very open angler. I don't have secrets. My only secret is hard work and graft. And there were people catching, I don't know, 10 carp, 15 carp a year. I was catching that in 24 hours. And I was saying, look, guys, they're eating the key to the exclusion of everything else. Go and buy a bag of key, fish off my back. I haven't got a problem. I don't need to catch them again or more of them. And I'd see the guys that turn up with 3 bags of instant attraction strawberry crush. I'd say, what are you doing? Well, it was on 3 for 2. So I can either buy 1 kilo of the key or 3 kilos of instant. I said, but they're not eating it in the same amount, guys. And unfortunately, the general public were the same. You know, we are not going to spend £15 on a kilo of a key when we can get 3 kilos of a ready-made. We are not going to buy sharpened hooks when we can get 2 packets of just out the packet hooks. And it's the fishing business, and I get it. And, you know, people were not buying it, irrespective of how many carp were being caught on it. There is a threshold to what people will spend on bait. There is.
I agree. I sell an expensive. In fact, I only sell expensive bait, really. And yeah, I agree. But I mean, people will happily spend a bloody fortune on the latest tackle and change the alarms and all that. The bait is one of the things that really matters, because if the carp don't want to eat it, you're not catching them, are you?
I go into fishing tackle shops and I see people walking and they will say, have you got any Scopex Squid 15 mil, or have you got any RGB baits, Atlantic Krill in 15? And they'll go down and say, oh no, we haven't, but we've got it in next week. The guy will then walk out with an alternative. So he'll buy some sticky baits Krill in 15 or some Baitworks 15. You know, this isn't knocking either of those. No. If I go in and cannot get the bait I want, the size I want, the type I want, I'll go somewhere where I can get it. But there are a huge percentage of those that keep the tackle shop open, the bait business going, that say, if I can't have that, then I'll have that. And they will say, well, no, I am not spending £15 a kilo on that when I can get that. I can get 2 kilos of it for that price. That's the reality of the bait business, as you well know.
Absolutely, yeah, no, absolutely, absolutely, I understand. And I mean, do you know what? On the flip side, for some people, it doesn't matter. They just want a bit of bait to go fishing, and you know, perhaps it's not all about there's all that side of it, and yeah.
Oh, I agree fully. I mean, I ride £1,000 Boardman bike. Now, that in effect is like the larder of push bike world. I ride it. I ride all day at 17 miles an hour. I don't clip in. I don't have an aerodynamic bait, water bottle, because I don't want that. Yeah, I've got friends who spend 7 grand on a push bike and will ride all day at 21 miles per hour. So in effect, I'm the guy that says, I just want a bike that will propel me at a speed I'm happy, or I want a bait that will catch me carp. And no, I'm not spending 6 grand on a Pinarello, nor am I spending 16 quid a kilo on the key, and I get that fully. And, and that's what, makes the bait world go round. That's what keeps fishing tackle businesses open.
Which, to be fair, is a good thing, because we'd all be very
Absolutely.
sad if these shops shut, and I know many have, and it is a very, it's terrible, really. But yeah. Anyway,
absolutely. And I'm all for it. Nash have simplified their range for 2024. They had the instant attraction range. You've got 6 or 7 baits in it. You've got them pop-ups. You've then got plume juices. You've then got ready-made. You've then got shell. You have got a massive range. So for 2024, there will be simply 3 baits. There'll be a fish meal, there'll be a cold water food bait, and then there'll be scopex squid. The range is simplified.
Is that right? Is it? Wow.
Yeah. So scopex squid will be exactly the same. This is you've heard it here first on a podcast. Scopex squid will be unaltered, completely unaltered. The only change is the cultured hook baits will come in pots rather than plastic bags. It'll be a different packaging, exactly the same bait. Citrus will stay exactly the same. It'll be hook baits only, pop-ups, etc. And the citrus attractors, at a level it's not for me to disclose, will be within a food bait that you can use in the winter, and there'll be a fish meal bait as well. So the Nash bait range will be three.
Wow.
For simplified, because that's how the business model works. It's a massive business. If you turn the rollers off that are rolling thousands of kilos of scopex squid and say we need to put 100 kilos of amber tractor or whatever else, it doesn't make business sense, especially if scopex squid is catching so many carp, or the cell is catching, or sticky krill is catching, or sticking, it's got to make business sense, because if it doesn't make business sense, you're going to go in and the krill isn't available anymore. Scopex squid isn't available anymore. It's got to be a business sense.
Absolutely. And I mean, I think obviously those 3 baits are the ones that catch the most fish, aren't they? Presumably. So it's
those scopex squid will catch anywhere. They have to have a coarse fish meal bait, and for years we've been saying we want a bait that we can feed in winter, not in super big quantities, but a food bait that you can put in the colder months that you can use all winter by baiting up. Citrus isn't a bait that you would bait up with. It is a high attract bait. And funny enough, and again, part of the attractors in the citrus bait, and it's been documented, are from contain milk bee. One of the attractors in the citrus bait is milk bee.
Right. See, so I'm not familiar with citrus at all. I know it's more of a high attract.
Yeah, it's a bright high attract.
Yeah.
Hook bait, stroke. You can buy a kilo of it. It's a high attract. It's a cold water bait. But they've simply said we need obviously a food bait that people can go fish, rather than just fishing single hook baits. So that would be their third bait. That. So when you walk in and see the Nash range, you will have those 3.
Superb. And the other thing that confused me, these cultured baits, you just mentioned them. Did that came about off the back of the key, or have I got that confused?
No, I think cultured was, well, I think, you could well be right, because the cultured hook bait seemed to come around when the key was released, didn't it? It was about the same time. Yeah. And I know that, again, I've used the culture hook bait is exceptionally good, but you've got to be careful where you use it because of the soft outer surround. You've got to think about what happens with your presentation when the surround is gone. How does it affect it? Nuisance fish, etc. What kind of angler are you? Think of the size of the bait. But it is a very effective bait when used in the right, like any bait, as you well know, when used correctly. And I know that a lot of the lads use the cultured hook baits and actually baited up with them and fished over the top of them. So didn't just use them as hook baits, but actually use them as free offerings.
Wow.
So yeah, the cultured hook baits, but they originally came in probably in about 15 in like a sealed plastic bag, you know, the sealed bags. But now they're available in hook bait, you know, pots as well. So again, they are an advantage in the right time. They were, you could get citrus hook baits, you could get key cultured hook baits, and you could get scope squid cultured hook baits. Again, right place, right time, a massive advantage. Like pasties, you know, pasties a superb advantage, but not if you're fishing a rudd, roach, bream-filled water in the summer, like maggots and worms. You know, it's a bait is only as good as the person using it in the right place, isn't it?
Most definitely. Yeah. So you've taken us through all these different baits from the mid 80s. Present day, what is it you're fishing with in summer, winter?
I mean, I use scope squid in the summer. It's one of those baits. And when Gary bait, because, you know, coming off the key was like, oh, you've taken me off the herring, you've taken off my right arm. And Gary bait said, trust me, he says, this is a very effective bait. And it's one of those baits that every year gets better and better and better. And I've noticed I've fished probably 3 or 4 different waters, and it's just got better and better. You know, I mean, I'm a frozen bait fan. I've always been a frozen bait fan from day one. And that's what I use. I use the squid, Scopet squid all year round. In the wintertime, I use it in flake. I use higher tracks over the top of it. I've been using the new cold water test bait last year. Again, exceptionally good results on it. So it's very likely that from now onwards, I'll be using Scopet squid from March onwards and the cold water food bait in the winter.
And that's
I like to pick with the food, yeah.
That's kind of an amalgamation of the citrus and a food type winter bait, is it?
When you squeeze it, it's very soft. It crumbs down very easy. I would say the attractors are less attractors in the normal citrus, but it certainly smells very citrusy. And absolutely, it's one of those baits you can put in like your Enervite Golds, and you can feed in winter without overfeeding the fish. You know, I do like to put a bit of food out there in winter. Certainly when I leave, I like to, because I do think once you stop feeding them in winter, on a number of waters, it dies a death.
Yeah, definitely.
You know, I mean, we're not talking about your Brasenose and your Linears.
Yeah, of course, yeah.
If you are fishing your standard syndicate waters where angler pressure drops off, the fish retreat into certain areas, less people are fishing, I think once bait stops going out, I think fish just say, right, I always think of it as like people in an old folks home. If you stop feeding them, they will just sit in the chair all day and they'll turn their body rate down to survive, as you and I would do. You don't move around, you will last a lot longer. If you keep running around looking for food that isn't there, you will die.
Yeah, absolutely. If they don't have a need to, that they will shut things down. Yeah, absolutely.
They will shut things down. So that's why I do like a food. I mean, I used to bait up with the Scopet squid flake, and things like that. I did like to put a bit of food out there, but this new one they've done is very soft. You can literally squeeze it into a penny piece in your hand. It's just, I mean, I don't want to big something up that I've not used enough. Yeah. It worked for me well last year. Over 2 or 3 years, I'll be able to give I don't want to one of these people. It's best thing since sliced bread. Yeah. I've been using it a month. It's like, no, you're just undoing all your credibility somewhere. All those years of catching all those fish, and you have now it's like solubles. How many people did podcasts on solubles? Best thing since sliced bread. When was the last time you heard anybody talk about solubles?
Yeah, long gone, aren't they? Yeah.
They've only been out 6 months, and it was, they were game changers. There was podcast galore on them. I haven't heard them mentioned.
No. It's a funny old game, isn't it? But
it is. It's a fantastic game, and I love the bait game. But I do, I think people forget that the bait game isn't just the bait you put together. It's about where you put it, how you put it, how you apply it. It's you know it's I think people just go, in the olden days we said, well, I've got the best percentage protein bait, so I've got the best bait going. And that was a naive approach. But nowadays, when I think of bait, I think it's no different to location. You can locate carp, but it doesn't mean they're feeding. You've got to locate them and catch them. You've got to put the right rig, the right bait, the right time. You've got to be there at the right the right timing. And it's the same with bait. You can't just turn up with a great bait and expect to catch carp.
Exactly.
You've got to. There are so many facets to the bait, aren't they? And I think people just get mixed up with bait. Bait isn't just that round thing that you take out the packet. It's so many more facets to it, which is what makes it so enthralling.
Absolutely. I mean, you're absolutely right. You have to be in the best plate. You could have the best bait in the world. If you're not in front of the carp, they're simply not going to eat. Or if you're not presented correctly and it's not going to, there's a lot of things that have to come together for sure.
As I said, I learned that from all those years ago. Every single thing I do now is based as much around the mistakes as I made as it is as the successes I've had. So, getting a very high quality Heineval and putting 40 baits out on a water that was 27 acres full of weed with probably 120 carp, when the guy next to me was spodding out crap, but he had got the fish on it. My high protein bait was a great bait, but it wasn't what the fish wanted where they were in quantity. So, I have the better bait, but on its own, I was not fishing effectively, which is why fishing is so enthralling, maddening, obsessional, you can't understand it. That's why we're still in love with it, isn't it? It's not. So.
Yeah.
It's not arithmetic where 1 and 1 is only 2. It can't be 2.5 or 1 3/4. 1 + 1 is 2. But bait isn't like that, is it? Nor is fishing.
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. I really enjoyed that. That was a really good rundown of your bait over the years. I enjoyed it.
Yeah, thank you. I think I've really enjoyed that. I've tried to be, I am a Nash brand ambassador. I'm a brand ambassador, which is when you get old, you cease to be a consultant. You become a brand ambassador. So footballers cease to be footballers; they're brand ambassadors for Man United or Man City. So I'd like to think that what I've said is the truth, and it's there's no I'm trying to sell you this.
I know, very much so.
You undo your legacy, you undo the trust people have in you by just over egging the pudding and skirting issues and overselling some and underselling others. It's I do smile when I see a lot of stuff in print and think you've got a very short memory over whose baits you used to use.
Yeah, the thing is, if you genuinely believe in the product that you are representing, you don't need to do any of the other stuff, do you? You really don't. You just be honest, present the facts, and you're good, aren't you?
I can honestly say the difference between carp fishing now and in the olden days. In the olden days, you would have bait firms that would say, "Well, their bait's crap, ours is the best." Blah 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 blah. Nowadays, I can quite honestly say that Nash will say to me, "Yeah, mainline make a great bait. Sticky made a great bait," and I'm absolutely sure that Sticky say exactly the same. They might well believe their own bait is the best one, but the days of bait companies putting other bait companies down, it makes you look a fool. If I hear somebody from one bait company putting down, well, that mainline sells crap or Sticky krill's no good, I just think you clearly don't know what you're talking about. And you've undone anything else I may think about the validity of your arguments. Once you can ruin a legacy or your trust by 1 or 2 stupid, daft statements.
Absolutely, yeah, very much.
So yeah, I've really enjoyed that, and I would, hope people have enjoyed it as well, or will enjoy it, should I say? We did.
I'm sure they will.
We did record all that, I hope.
I'm sure they will. I'm going to end it with one question, if you don't mind.
Yeah, absolutely.
And be honest, and I know you will be honest, you
I
always
will
are. Do you ever kind of have a little hankering or fancy rolling a bait again? I imagine the answer is no, but I'll ask anyway.
Do I? If somebody said to me, right, Jules, the key is only available in a base mix. You can have this if you roll it yourself. I'd roll it myself tomorrow.
You do it tomorrow.
And that's not knocking scope bait, squid, or the new test baits. You know, you have that. You know, you have that affinity with something. So, do I have a hankering? Do I have a hankering over spending hours of my life doing at my age with my arthritic knees?
Yeah.
No, I don't hanker that. I loved making bait. There is something you cannot duplicate
Yeah.
about the feeling. It doesn't make it any more important, but knowing that you've stood in that kitchen, rolled that bait, and has worked is the same. And I try and put it into the ready-made rigs. Would I feel the same about a ready-made rig as I would about one I've tied myself? Probably not. Even if it's identical, there's something about tying my own rigs and casting out myself and things like that. And there's just that little bit of thing about rolling your own bait that doesn't make it any more important, but it does, doesn't it?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I've been rolling for so long, it just feels normal to me, but I have used other people's baits and I feel a little bit like I'm cheating. You know, if I'm using, say, Kenny's bait or something, I do feel like I'm cheating a little bit. So yeah, I absolutely agree with you.
Do you have the time though? That's what I mean. Literally, I probably will use over the course of a season 200 kilos of scope squid.
It's a lot of work. Yeah.
And we're talking 12 mils generally.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know how long that would take me to roll. And remember, if I'm never sat round with my feet up going, well, I've got 6 hours to kill today. I want to be out fishing. You know, I want to be out fishing or baiting up or bike riding. If I could somehow roll 200 kilos of bait in 2 days, I'd do it.
Yeah.
We'd all have an electric car if it charged up in 1 minute 30 to get you 400 miles, wouldn't we? Mm-hmm. But it doesn't.
No. I thought that would be the answer, but yeah, I thought I'd ask anyway.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah. I'd love to do, but I don't think it's ever going to happen.
No, I don't enjoy it either, and I love bait, so yeah, I can fully understand your stance on that.
All right, mate, that was absolutely fantastic.
Julian, thanks ever so much. Always a pleasure, and yeah, I'll catch you soon.
All right, mate. Thanks, Sam.
Cheers, bye.
Bye, mate.
Psst. If you're still here and you happen to be listening on the Apple Podcast app or Apple iTunes, please take a few moments, leave me a review, let me know how we're doing with this podcast. A, it's really nice to hear from you, and B, it helps this podcast stay relevant and stay in the ratings. If it doesn't stay in the ratings, it falls behind, people don't listen to it, and obviously that means there's not much point me doing it anymore. So if you can take a moment to leave me a review, I'd really appreciate it. If you're not listening on an Apple device, I don't think you can leave us a review unless there's some means that I'm not aware of, but nonetheless, I appreciate you listening. It does mean a lot to me. And yeah, feel free to reach out on social media. That's it. I look forward to bringing the next episode to you very soon.